You see the flashing lights in your mirror again, and even if you've done nothing seriously wrong, your body reacts before your brain catches up. That sudden tightening in your chest, the way your hands instinctively adjust on the steering wheel, the way your eyes start checking mirrors more than the road for those few seconds before you pull over. What most people don't realize is that a traffic stop in the United States is not just about the violation itself. It is a structured legal interaction where behavior, communication, timing, and even silence can influence how the entire situation unfolds. Two drivers can commit the same minor speeding violation and walk away with completely different outcomes. One gets a warning, the other gets a fine. Sometimes the difference has nothing to do with the law on paper and everything to do with how the interaction plays out on the roadside. Let's talk about this in a realistic way, the way it actually happens on the street, not the simplified version people repeat online. When a police officer initiates a stop, the first few seconds are already important before they even reach your window. From their perspective, they are managing uncertainty. They do not know who you are yet, what your intentions are, or how you will respond. That is why they watch your driving behavior as they approach. Did you pull over immediately or slowly? Did you signal properly? Did you stop in a safe location? These early signals form a mental baseline. Now think about your side. Most drivers are thinking about something completely different. They are thinking about the reason they got stopped, maybe replaying the last few minutes, maybe mentally preparing excuses, maybe panicking slightly. That mental gap between what the officer is observing and what the driver is thinking is where misunderstandings often begin. One of the most important moments is when the officer first speaks. The tone is usually calm but firm, something like asking for your license, registration, and proof of insurance. This is standard procedure. But what happens next is where drivers often make mistakes without realizing it. Some drivers immediately start reaching into glove compartments, under seats, or bags without saying anything. From their perspective, they are being helpful and efficient. From an officer's perspective, sudden movement without explanation can create uncertainty. Not because it is wrong, but because in a controlled roadside environment, predictability matters more than speed. A better approach in most situations is controlled communication. For example, informing the officer before reaching for something. Something as simple as explaining that your documents are in your wallet or glove box reduces ambiguity. It allows the officer to mentally categorize your actions as expected, rather than unpredictable. Now, let's go deeper into something most drivers misunderstand completely. The officer's questions are not random conversation. They are structured. When they ask, "Do you know why I stopped you?" it is not just curiosity. It is a behavioral assessment tool. They are evaluating your awareness, honesty, and consistency. If your answer aligns with the violation, it often confirms clarity. If it does not, they may continue probing. But here is where drivers often create unnecessary complications. They start over-explaining. Instead of a simple answer, they give a long narrative. They talk about traffic, road conditions, what they thought the speed limit was, or how everyone else was speeding too. In their mind, they are trying to justify or reduce severity. But in practice, excessive explanation can introduce contradictions or irrelevant details that shift focus away from the original issue. Silence, on the other hand, is also misunderstood. Many people think staying silent looks suspicious. That is not always true. Calm silence combined with cooperation is often neutral. The problem arises when silence is paired with nervous movement or avoidance behavior. That combination creates uncertainty, which may lead to more questioning. Then comes one of the most important stages of the stop, when the officer takes your documents and returns to their vehicle. This is not downtime. This is evaluation and verification. They may be checking your license status, registration validity, warrants, prior violations, or vehicle records. This is also the point where they decide whether the stop will remain a simple citation, become a warning, or escalate into further inspection. During this waiting period, drivers often unintentionally make mistakes. Some become restless and start moving around too much. Some try to exit the vehicle without instruction. Some repeatedly check in with the officer. From a legal standpoint, you are still being detained for the traffic stop, so leaving your vehicle or creating unnecessary movement can complicate the situation. Now let's address something that creates a lot of confusion: being asked to step out of the car. Many drivers interpret this as a serious escalation. In reality, officers in the United States generally have legal authority to request that drivers exit the vehicle during a traffic stop for safety reasons. The key issue is not the request itself, but how the driver responds emotionally. Calm compliance keeps the interaction stable. Visible frustration or resistance, even without verbal argument, can change the tone of the stop. At this stage, perception becomes extremely important. Officers are trained to observe behavior patterns under pressure. They are not just listening to words, they are watching consistency between speech, movement, and reaction. If everything aligns smoothly, the stop often remains routine. If something feels inconsistent, additional questions or actions may follow. Passengers are another area where misunderstandings happen. Many drivers assume officers should only interact with them. In reality, passengers can be asked questions depending on the situation. This is often related to safety, identity verification, or situational clarity. A common mistake drivers make is trying to answer for passengers immediately. That can unintentionally complicate the interaction because each individual in the vehicle is treated separately in terms of observation. Now let's talk about one of the most sensitive topics during traffic stops: searches. A lot of people believe police can search a vehicle whenever they want. That is not accurate in most cases. Searches typically require consent, probable cause, or specific legal justification. However, what actually happens on the roadside is more complex in practice. Many searches occur because drivers give permission without fully understanding they are allowed to refuse. This is where pressure and discomfort play a role. The officer may ask politely if they can take a quick look inside the vehicle. The driver, feeling nervous or wanting to appear cooperative, agrees without thinking through the legal implications. That moment alone can change the entire scope of the stop. It is important to understand that cooperation does not always mean consent to everything. There is a difference between providing required documents and voluntarily allowing a search. Most drivers never clearly distinguish between those two during a stressful interaction. Now let's look at a very common real-world scenario. A driver is pulled over for a minor speeding violation. The officer approaches, everything is calm. The driver provides documents. But the driver is visibly nervous. Hands shaking slightly, voice unstable, avoiding direct communication. Nothing illegal is happening, but the officer begins to pay closer attention. Why? Because nervousness alone is not suspicious, but in combination with inconsistency or unclear communication, it increases uncertainty. The officer may extend the stop, ask more questions, or run additional checks, not because the driver is guilty of anything serious, but because the situation is not fully predictable. Now compare that with a driver in the same situation who remains steady. Hands visible, response is short and consistent, no unnecessary movement, no over-explaining. That stop is more likely to end quickly with either a warning or a simple citation. This is one of the biggest truths about traffic stops that most people never learn. The outcome is not only determined by the violation itself, but also by how controlled the interaction remains. Another important factor is tone of voice. Many drivers underestimate how much tone influences interpretation. Even respectful words can sound defensive if the tone is sharp or rushed. On the other hand, calm and steady responses often reduce tension naturally. Officers are human in the sense that they interpret emotional cues in real time, especially in situations where safety assessment is part of their responsibility. One of the most misunderstood behaviors is arguing at the roadside. Even when a driver believes they are completely right, the roadside is not the place where legal arguments are resolved. That happens later through formal channels. On the street, arguing usually shifts focus from the violation to the interaction itself, which can prolong the stop unnecessarily. There is also the issue of documentation handling. When officers take your documents, they may hold them while running checks. Some drivers become anxious and repeatedly ask for them back or question the delay. This often increases tension rather than resolving it. The processing time is usually procedural, not personal. Now consider something more subtle but very real. Officers are trained to maintain control of the interaction space. This includes physical positioning, communication flow, and timing. If a driver interrupts constantly, moves unpredictably, or tries to control the conversation, it can disrupt that structure. Even if the driver's intention is cooperation, the perception may shift. And then there is the issue of fines versus warnings. Many people assume everything automatically results in a ticket. That is not true. Discretion plays a role in many stops. But discretion is influenced by multiple factors, including severity of violation, driving history, documentation validity, and how smoothly the interaction goes. A calm, organized interaction increases the likelihood of leniency in minor cases. A tense or unclear interaction reduces it. Even small issues like expired registration or missing insurance proof can sometimes be resolved with warnings if everything else is cooperative. But if the interaction is chaotic or inconsistent, the same issues may lead to citations. Another thing drivers rarely think about is consistency under pressure. It is not about being perfect. It is about avoiding sudden changes in behavior that create confusion. For example, switching explanations repeatedly, changing tone abruptly, or shifting from calm to defensive quickly can all influence perception. There is also a psychological layer here that matters more than people think. Traffic stops are time-sensitive risk assessments for officers. They are trained to resolve uncertainty efficiently. That means anything that reduces clarity or increases unpredictability may extend the interaction. And yet, many drivers unknowingly increase uncertainty by trying too hard to control the situation or explain everything in detail. In reality, the most effective approach in most routine stops is simple consistency. Clear answers, minimal unnecessary movement, respectful tone, and awareness of procedural flow. At the end of the day, a traffic stop is not a confrontation by default. It is a structured interaction that can either remain routine or become complicated depending on how both sides manage uncertainty in those few critical minutes on the roadside. And the next time those lights appear behind you, what matters most is not panic or overthinking, but understanding how those early moments shape everything that follows in ways most drivers never fully realize until they experience it firsthand.